Good evening, welcome to Face to Face on Bent TV. I'm Amy Henderson and tonight I'm joined by Irshad Manji and she's written a book, The Trouble with Islam. Thank you very much for joining us, Irshad.
My pleasure. You got guts to be associating with me.
Oh, really? Oh, am I in trouble now?
Well, you know what? We won't declare premature trouble, but let's just see after we walk out of this space.
Okay. Well, I'm going to talk about the trouble with Islam in a moment, but I wanted you to tell me a little bit about your background. You grew up in Vancouver.
That's right.
And I wanted to talk about a madrasa. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
It's a Muslim school.
Yeah.
And you got in a bit of trouble because you questioned things at your madrasa. So tell us about your upbringing and why you question Islam.
Sure. Well, my family and I are refugees from Idi Amin's Uganda, Uganda being a small country in East Africa. We got kicked out in 1972 and we settled just outside of Vancouver in that same year. And quite right, I grew up attending two types of schools, the regular public secular school of, most North American children, and on top of that, every Saturday for several hours at a stretch, the Islamic religious school, the madrasa. And there, I regularly took in two major messages, week in and week out, that women are inferior, and that the Jews are treacherous, not to be trusted. Now, I've never said, Amy, nor would I ever say that every madrasa teaches these things. That would be patently false. I wouldn't know that since I've not attended every madrasa. But thank goodness. But this one certainly did, and I was impacted by it quite a bit. However, even back then, I began asking questions. I think my first question from my madrasa teacher was, well, why can't girls lead prayer? I asked more sophisticated questions over the course of a number of years until I asked one too many. And the one too many had to do with my, wondering where is the evidence for the so-called Jewish conspiracy against Islam. You love to go on about it, sir. I'm talking to my madrasa teacher. Tell me, where is the proof of the plot? Well, that question, first posed at age 14, got me kicked out of the madrasa permanently.
So you were not allowed to go back?
I was not allowed to go back unless, of course, I groveled for forgiveness. But I figure forgiveness for what? I don't think that there's any crime in asking questions, number one. And number two, the kinds of things that my madrasa teacher was indoctrinating all of us with simply did not square with what was happening on the ground. And, I guess the journalist in me really came out at an early age because I remember one of the things he said to the kids was, the Jews worship mullah, meaning money, more than Allah, meaning God, and he thought that this juxtaposition of mullah and Allah was very clever. But I remember, and he backed that up, by the way, by saying that the Jews are consumed with business. Well, I remember thinking at the time, wait a minute, sir, I look around my suburb, which was very multi-ethnic, very multicultural, and I remember saying to myself, I see new business signs going up in languages like Hindi, Punjabi, Cantonese, Urdu. Sir, if you're going to pick on any group for being consumed with business, it ain't the Jews, it's us, Asians. So what he was saying was not logical given what I was seeing. Only later did I realize that there was such a thing as anti-Semitism. Only later did I know that one ought to have moral clarity about, prejudice and discrimination against others. But at the time, it was simply the lack of logic in what he was saying that got me.
Muslim youths are not encouraged to question their faith. Why is it important for anyone to question faith? Like, why is it important to ask those questions?
Well, if you don't ask questions, whether it is of mullahs or whether it is of media or anything in between, you become something of a robot, something of an automaton who is obviously very vulnerable to propaganda. Now, if that's the kind of world and the kind of life that you want to lead, well, if that's a choice, I'm not going to stop you from having it. But I've always felt that it makes no sense to call yourself a person of faith and worship a creator and then reduce that majestic, complex creator to a manufacturer of robots.
Yeah.
How is it, I wonder, that we as people of faith are paying tribute to a majestic creator, if what we're doing is essentially saying this creator has manufactured automatons? And that's why in my book I call myself a Muslim refusenik.
Yes, I wanted to ask about that.
Well, it doesn't mean that I refuse to be a Muslim. That much should be obvious, because why would I write a book that puts me on the front lines of so much anger and hatred if I was indifferent to Islam or even hostile to it? No. By Muslim refusenik, I mean that I refuse to join an army of automatons in the name of God, anybody's God, including my own.
Well, and you said too, like, when that stuff happened and you started questioning Islam, you had a choice to make. You could either walk away from Islam or you could give it another chance.
Yeah.
And you did give it. You chose to give it another chance, and another, and another, and another. So, what is it that makes you want to stick with that religion and not walk away?
Well, at first, after I got kicked out of the madrasa at age 14, you're quite right, I'd had a critical choice to make. As you put it, I could have given, I could have become a secular North American, as many, by the way, Muslims quietly do, or I could have given Islam another chance, as you rightly put it. And at that point, I decided to give Islam another chance out of fairness to my faith. Why do I say fairness? Because maybe my madrasa teacher was just a lousy teacher, and why should my faith be punished for his shortcomings? And so over the course of the next 20 years, pretty much until this day, I have taken the time to study Islam on my own, when there were no cameras, no interviews, no publishers approaching me, and certainly no money to be made. In other words, I studied Islam with total and utter sincerity. And I'm pleased to say that as a result of all of that self-study, I came to discover a progressive side of my faith. And that progressive side is an idea that I will now sort of teach your audience. It's an idea called ijtihad. Ijtihad is Islam's lost tradition of critical thinking. I know that it sounds a lot like jihad to non-Arab ears. Yikes. And in fact, it comes from the same root, to struggle. But unlike violent jihad, ijtihad is all about independent thinking and independent reasoning. And I can get into that in a second, but the reason I've even introduced this word ijtihad is that ultimately is what keeps me in the fold, keeps me in the faith, is that I recognize that Islam once had a tradition of progressive, pluralistic thinking that there is no reason that it cannot have again. And so I found something that is worth salvaging in my faith. And ultimately, you know what the great irony of all of this is? That if I had been stuck in that parochial Muslim microcosm called the madrasa, I would have never learned about this positive aspect of Islam called ijtihad. It is precisely because of the freedoms that I have been given in the West to research, to delve into ideas, to explore further, to challenge, to be challenged. That is the reason that I have discovered ijtihad. And so the bottom line is, the West has saved my faith in my faith.
Well, that's interesting. I wanted to just quickly, I wanted to talk about the anti-Semitism and things like that. And I read an interesting thing that Oprah Winfrey awarded you with the Chutzpah Award, which is for audacity, nerve, boldness and conviction. And I thought that was quite funny and ironic because it's the Chutzpah Award, which is of course a Yiddish word, a Jewish word, and also the use of the Muslim refusenik. Like refusenik is a very you know, Yiddish word as well.
Well, in a sense it is. A refusnik just actually refers first and foremost to the Soviet refusniks, the Soviet Jews who were desperately trying to get out of the Soviet Union and, you know, immigrate to Israel. This was back in the, you know, 70s and 80s, and were denied, were refused their right to move out of the Soviet Union. But in turn, what they did is they refused to, you know, sort of contribute to a soulless, totalitarian, unthinking system. And for that reason, I call myself a refusnik, because I refuse to be complicit in a belief system that is right now hurting too many people too much of the time. But I think you're absolutely right about the Oprah, you know, chutzpah award. But you know what I love about that? I think it's great too, but what I love ultimately about that is that here is this black Christian woman awarding a brown Muslim woman something called the chutzpah award. Like, that is perfect. That is so pluralistic. And frankly, that's the kind of world in which, you know, my Islam is very much sort of congruent with.
I wanted to bring up a point that you make about what people will take away from your book and things like that, that like what it will bring to Muslims and non-Muslims, and the point that you were hoping that non-Muslims wouldn't be scared of being labelled a racist by bringing up these points about what's wrong with Islam. And I wanted to make the point that, is it our responsibility or our right to question Islam if we are non-Muslims? Like, you know, can a man argue the feminist cause, or as a recovering Catholic, can I still have a say in the way that the Catholic Church handles their stuff?
Yes, yes, and yes. You know, I'm glad that you brought up the analogy of, can a man argue the feminist cause? I think we are far enough into the feminist movement around the world to recognize that if men are not involved, then frankly, very little is going to change. And
but
that's
are we far enough into the Islamic debate?
Well, hold on a second. Yes, yes, we are, and yes, we ought to be, even if we are not, because I guess the searing reality is that no society can operate as a series of non-interference pacts between groups that, like it or not, September 11th, the Bali bombings, and all kinds of other atrocities that have happened both before and afterwards have made Islam the business of non-Muslims as well. And, you know, I'm going to go a step further and say something that I realize is going to be very, very counterintuitive. But in my own experience, and frankly that of other people I've spoken with, I have found that the pressure for Muslims to have these kinds of conversations within our communities, the pressure to have those conversations actually comes from outside of our communities. Let me give you an example of what I mean. When my book was first released in Canada, various broadcast journalists like yourself, you know, approached the Muslim leaders in Canada to debate me on camera and to debate me on radio. And to a person, they all declined the invitation. 3 weeks after the book came out, it hit #1. And it stayed there on the bestseller list. And surprise, surprise, the same week that it hit #1, almost all of the people, the Muslim leaders who had, turned down the opportunity to debate me, went back to the broadcasters to say, okay, now we're ready. Why? What happened? What happened was, at first, they were hoping that, you know, as the arbiters of all that is Islamically legitimate, by not giving this book their seal of approval, that the general public would also not take it seriously. But what they didn't bargain on is that the general public is hungry enough for honest questions about Islam, and to have these conversations. Yes, it started people questioning.
Sorry, I'm going to have to cut you short. We have to go to a break, but we will be back very shortly with Irshad. Good evening, welcome back to Face to Face. I'm Amy Henderson, and tonight we're joined by Irshad Manji, and she's written a book called The Trouble with Islam. Thank you very much for talking to us.
Pleasure.
I cut you off very rudely before the break, but I wanted to touch on Salman Rushdie, you interviewed Salman Rushdie, and I found it an incredibly interesting interview. And I wanted to talk about some of the things that you talked about. He made a point that you were talking about Islamic reform before, and he made a point that Islamic reformation starts in the West, and you were saying that, yeah, it usually comes from outside of the group, and it starts with women, because women understand the problems of Islam. So does that follow that a gay woman's voice is more pertinent?
Well, not to a lot of Muslims, it's not. But you know,
to a lot of Muslims, women are.
Yeah, and if I haven't already told you this, let me say it now, that, you know, probably the most surprising aspect of my life since the book's release is the amount of support and affection and even love that I am hearing, both from young Muslims and from Muslim women. And yes, of course, there is quite an overlap between the two. But what I find really interesting is that, you know, while a lot of young Muslims take issue with my sexual orientation, a lot more do not. And increasingly what I am hearing from young Muslims is, I remember this one letter I got only a couple of days ago saying, who better than a lesbian to enlighten Muslims? And this comes from a Muslim boy, okay? Like, wow. When I say boy, I mean, you know, in his teens, right? Who better than a lesbian to enlighten, you know, Muslims about the need for open-mindedness? I mean, Irshad, you know, given all of the strikes against you, you know, it is the fanatics who have declared war on reason and happiness, and you represent for them everything that they hate. So you keep going, girl. You keep going, and, you know, do not hide from who you are. Again, I find it fascinating that there is such a wild swing in those reactions, and what is fascinating to me about the wild swing is that, frankly, before you know, I came out with the book, I would have assumed that the vast majority of those from whom I hear, even those who respect and support my position on universal human rights, would still take issue with my orientation. No, that is so not the bigger, you know, the bigger debate that's going on.
Yes, exactly. Well, that was the thing that I actually found most admirable about most of the things I've read about you, is that it's not harped on, and it's people are concentrating on your debate and not your sexuality, what you're trying to bring people's attention to. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to talk about with Salman Rushdie is the whole fatwa thing, and he upset a lot of Muslims with his book, The Satanic Verses, and some people said that he crossed the line too far in doing that and in discussing Islam. Do you worry about crossing the line in your writing? Do you worry about a fatwa? Do you know?
I actually don't worry about a fatwa. That doesn't mean that I invite one, but I don't live in fear. I'm very resolute in the integrity of what I've done and why I've done it. Back to Salman Rushdie and you know, do I live in fear? I actually asked him, why would you, Salman Rushdie, support a young Muslim like myself to write a book that may very well invite the kind of havoc into my life that has been visited upon yours? And without any hesitation, Amy, he replied, because a book is more important than a life. And I actually laughed, thinking, okay, this guy's about to give me the more serious answer. He said, no, let me explain. He said, when a writer puts out a thought, it can be disagreed with vigorously, vehemently, even violently, but it cannot be unthought. And he said, Irshad, that is the great permanent gift that a writer gives to this world, so that your life may be snuffed out as a result of it, but your ideas can never be snuffed out. Well. How's that for a profound, you know, bit of inspiration?
That's my favorite quote.
How's that, hey? And needless to say, as I was writing the book, and, you know, one paragraph led to another, and I thought, oh, geez, you know, I don't know.
Was in your mind?
Oh, sure it was in my mind. Sure it was. But his words were also in my mind, and that is part of the integrity that I'm referring to. You know, there's this a guy by the name of Edward Said, who is loved by many, many Muslims as being like this great, you know, upholder of Palestinian rights and so forth. But Edward Said also pointed out that the role of the intellectual is to speak as directly, as plainly, and as honestly as possible. No intellectual is supposed to worry about whether what is said pleases, displeases, or embarrasses people in power. And that ought to apply to Muslims as well.
You asked Salman Rushdie a really good question, which I want to ask you. The question is, can Islam be divorced from oppression?
What did he say? Can you remind me? Not that I'm taking my cues.
He dodged the question too.
Wait a minute, what do you mean too? Are you suggesting I'm dodging the question? No, I just want to remind myself what he said so I'm not repeating him.
He said it's difficult, it was difficult in Afghanistan, but you know there are places in the Muslim world where where much more open society does begin to obtain, like Dubai.
Right. Okay, well, I think that was a lame-o answer, to be very honest, okay? Because, you know...
Good one.
Yeah, I'll give you a good one. The good one is that the jury is still out on whether oppression and Islam can in fact be, divorced. In many of the same ways, the jury is out about whether religion and oppression can be divorced, right? But I think that, frankly, it does have to go a step further within Islam. There are all kinds of Arab cultural traditions in the way in which Islam is practiced, and those cultural traditions can be separated from Islam, at least in theory. What kinds of what kind of cultural traditions, though, am I talking about? There is one in particular that I think your audience will really sort of, be interested to hear about. I don't know if you've ever heard about honor. It sounds honorable. After all, we call it honor. But when it's applied to Muslim women, honor is anything but honorable. Honor is that Arab cultural tradition that requires a Muslim woman to give up her individuality in order to maintain the reputation of the men in her life. This, in essence, turns her into communal property, so that her life doesn't belong to her in the way your life belongs to you and mine belongs to mine in this part of the world. Rather, her life belongs to her family, to a wider community, her clan, her tribe, sometimes even her nation. And here's where things really get freaky. If she is accused of dishonoring, of crossing the line, then she can be harmed with relative impunity. She can be raped or she can be killed, because remember, and this is the twisted nature of honor, it's not just her life she has ruined, it is the life of a much greater number of people. Now, this kind of thing, honor killings, happen in the name of Islam, but the reality is that Islam and honor can in fact be separated. Okay? Again, in theory. In actuality, Arab culture has become so steeped in the way Islam has been practiced for the last 600 or 700 years that it's going to be very difficult to untangle. So here's the deal. I'm trying to be optimistic, but not naive.
Well, there are parallels too with the other religions, other organized religions like Catholics and the Jewish faith and Islam. All of these religions, will they ever change? I mean, my Catholic mother loves to say that, we have changed the Catholic Church, but in such tiny, insignificant ways. Right. Will any of these religions ever change? And also, are they more willing to change when they are being questioned over other things, like in the Catholic Church, all the scandal that's going on there? Yeah. Is that the perfect time to raise other points about reform in that church? Like with the September 11, is that the perfect time to raise those points?
Yes, I think it is. And I realize that a lot of people, both in the Catholic Church and, in the Muslim community, love to accuse, dissidents of being, quote, opportunists, sort of capitalizing on something nasty that has happened in the religion and then using that to, to spread a wider message. But look, anybody who has done effective social change, whether in the gay and lesbian community, whether in the Catholic Church, whether in the Muslim community, recognizes something very basic, that half the battle is getting people to care, okay? And like it or not, because of September 11th, or because of this, sexual abuse scandals that are rocking, the Catholic Church worldwide, people care. People are now willing to listen. And if we don't step up to the plate, those of us who do have freedoms in this part of the world to ask important questions, then when is change ever going to happen? It's a very, very basic question. And so if and when those Muslims who like to, sort of conveniently tar me as an opportunist, when they do that, I gladly accept my guilt in that. Sure, I'm an opportunist. I take the opportunity, absolutely. And people can call me any name in the book. My simple response is, you have every right to suspect me of whatever you want. Since I'm not, however, running away from your epithets and your insults, now you have no choice but to actually address the substance of my argument. What do you say? Let's hash it out. And it's amazing how the metaphorical jaw drops when people realize you're actually not running away from their labels.
Excellent. We don't have a lot of time. I wanted to ask you a couple of quick questions, a little more fluff now. You're here as part of the Age Writers Festival.
Right.
And you've written these books, you've been quoted as saying books were your passion, I read somewhere. So what are you reading at the moment?
Oh, wow, that's it's putting me on the spot here. Books are my passion, it's true. Non-fiction books in particular. Sorry, I'm a bit of a geek in that way, in many ways actually. But I'm happy to say that on the 23-hour plane ride to Melbourne, from where I was before, I actually picked up a novel for the first time in a long time and devoured it. And this novel is called The World Unseen, by a British lesbian author named Shamim Sharif. And so I won't go into the details about what it's about. Suffice to say, however, that it completely held my attention. It was wonderful, and it's also wonderful to see like an emerging generation of South Asian or immigrant and refugee authors who are going well beyond the strictures of their own communities to explore that which is so taboo in their communities as well.
One other thing, it's an Oprah question. What do you want to be remembered for? I think it's a great question. What do you hope?
Are you suggesting the end is nigh?
No, I'm not. At the end of the day, if there's one thing that you can be remembered for, what is that? You've done a lot of work in lots of areas.
My spiky hair, for one thing. Why not? Why not? It's different. But if people want to go a little bit deeper, then what I would love to be remembered for is that she dared to think. And she dared, as a result of thinking, to also question the sort of the stridency of all kinds of communities, including the gay and lesbian community. When I was doing queer television, I know we're running out of time, when I was doing queer television, the show I used to host in Toronto, the most vitriolic hate mail I got in the first year came from gays and lesbians who said that I wasn't militant enough for the cause. And I would ask them, what's the cause? If your cause is to be validated at every turn, then you're right, I'm not militant enough. But if the cause is democracy of thought, expression, and opinion, then I happen to think that this is a show for all of us, including straight people. And I'm happy to say that, over the course of the next 2 years, 3 seasons altogether, more gays and lesbians came to me and said, thank you for treating me as an individual and not as a cardboard cutout of this or that community. And I rather believe that the same will happen with Muslims.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for daring to question. It's been wonderful talking to you, Irshad. If you want to know more, definitely check out the book, The Trouble with Islam and The Problem with Islam.
The Trouble with Islam, and the website is www.muslimrefusenik.com.
That's right. Check it out. Thank you very much for giving us your time.
My pleasure. Peace.